Hey, what's up, Longhorn fans? Welcome to the deep dive. I'm Paul. That guy's Ian. And we're going to do a deep dive. We're going to do an off-season deep dive, which is the very best kind of dive. We're on the highest part of the high dive, and we're staring down at the water. Do we want to just jump off, or do we want to do a can opener or a cannonball, belly flop? We're going to find out. You guys tell us in the comments. And as you do that, make sure you like this video. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. And of course, join us at Inside Texas. I don't like how my voice broke right when I said, of course. That wasn't good. We're not going to redo it. We'll fix it in post. Make sure you join Inside Texas. It's the best conversation about Longhorn sports going, and all sorts of other fun stuff going on that board. Ian, how the heck are you? I noticed you're getting a better angle so people can take in the full deliciousness. What's going on, dude?
I'm ready to offer some real mouth breather takes because I cannot breathe through my nose with this cold that my children have inflicted upon me.
Many people in our comments have accused us of being mouth breathers, and yet this is actually accurate if you call us mouth breathers.
I am literally a mouth breather.
You are literally a mouth breather.
I need to do a sleep study too. I think I breathe through my mouth too much at sleep.
We got to get you a CPAP.
I think maybe so. Maybe in the year I get one.
You're not overweight, though, so I don't understand what the problem is. Well, just get overweight and see if that fixes it. Go the other way. You know what I mean?
That could be.
Hey, college football is going the other way. The last 3 years, it feels like every time you think there's some stability in college football, there's massive changes that upend it. We've got NIL. We've got effectively free agency, but not actually free agency, something more than free agency through the portal. We've got massive realignment, playoffs being reformed, and people looking at that, dogs and cats living together. And, of course, we're going to add the offseason to this realignment, spring ball, and the portal. So let's talk about the portal first, Ian. I know that we recently had a coaches convention where the coaches all voted that they would like to limit the portal to one portal per year in the spring. And they want it to be a narrow window for obvious reasons. College coaches are having to basically re-recruit their entire roster every couple of months. So what are your thoughts? I mean, should we be sympathetic to the college football coaches in this regard?
Well, for sure. I think that, we'll get into the practicality of this in a bit, but it really is a mess that, like, the game is so martial in nature. And if the coach can't find any leverage to whip everybody into line, with the barbarian at the gates, it's really, really hard to execute a team concept. If it's like, well, my quarterback's fielding offers, and especially like this is less of an issue at Texas than another school, because like, why would you leave Texas? You're winning, you're probably well compensated, etc. But even for Texas, like, you're promising backups that you need for depth. You can just check out for the entire season. Every professional sport they have tampering, and they have stuff that goes on, obviously, but they have these like restricted windows. So it's just not a full-time, what's next for me, individually focused deal.
What's interesting is every time the NCAA or coaches or the structures of football, the conferences, try to impose some sort of order and create this nice, algorithm or a hierarchy chart of like, we're in charge and we're telling you can only transfer at this time. It gets challenged in court, and the athletes win every case, every time, because they're free. There are no structures. It's not officially a professional league, even though it's effectively a semi-pro league. And you can't restrain their trade. You can't restrain their free movement. And in fact, we had a recent case in which basically a court ruled there is no portal window. A player can leave whenever they feel like leaving. Now, there are some practicalities to that. They may not. They don't want to leave in the mid-semester if that's going to mean they flunk all their courses and they can't transfer somewhere else. But it does mean practically the portal is a concept. It's not a hard and fast rule. And no one has to abide by it if they have the ability to sort of leave whenever they feel like it. So it's really a question of whether the athletes want to do it or not. So if they want to have 2 windows or 7 windows, there's going to be athletes who are going to be able to leave kind of whenever they want. I do think, though, if you do create a rule and put some structures around it and time it to the semesters, you can restrain it, most of the movement, to one portal. But that has not been approved. The coaches voted unanimously to do that. It's not been approved, and we're not sure if it could even be enforced. So that's one aspect of football that's completely changed. Here's another aspect that's changed, Ian.
Wait. Before, can we say one more thing on the December window?
Sure.
The very first time that one of these coaches that voted for it needs a new quarterback, he's going to tell them to come in the winter portal, because you don't want your quarterback to come after half your offseason is already over, and then indoctrinate him in the concepts and get him involved with. You want him as soon as possible. So the way it would work is they'd have some noble intention of a spring portal window, but then the most privileged players, like starting with the quarterbacks and the most well-represented skill athletes, would shift over earlier, and then everybody else would do the same thing eventually.
Ian, what you're telling us is that every buyer requires a seller, and every seller requires a buyer.
That's it.
So the coaches can pontificate about this in theory. The fact is, if Arch Manning wants to leave the University of Texas, the coaches who are telling you with all sorts of high and mighty righteousness that we should only have one portal window, I've got a family, they're all going to be immediately sliding into Arch's DM saying, hey, come on, man, come here in February. Let's get started. We can't wait to get you, Arch. So I think I made this comparison about stuff like this and sort of collusion before, but it's OPEC. They all agree we're going to make oil, we're going to limit production, we're going to get oil up to $150 a barrel, and it's going to benefit all of us. And immediately after the meeting where they all agree, Venezuela and Iran are like, yeah, we're going to kind of do what we want, and we're going to try to reap the benefits and hope everyone else adheres to the rule. And so I think that a similar thing, you're absolutely right. The portal would not have this amount of free agency if you didn't have buyers and sellers. And that's always going to be the case. I do think, in fairness, though, that the coaches are trying to restrict each other and their worst instincts by trying to confine it. Does that mean Lane Kiffin is going to follow the rule? No. He's going to do what he wants.
The real solution to all this is contracts and clauses where you can do things like fine players. Like, okay, you can leave and you can bail on the school right now whenever you want, but we're not going to pay you your contract because you didn't honor it. Or the other team's got to buy you out of it and pay us. Or, sure, you can check out and stop coming to practice, but guess what? Your contract says, whatever.
The commissioner of college football gives you a compensatory high school recruit. So a guy who's a 4-star who's committed to Georgia, you get to pick him off the roster and go, no, you're a Longhorn now. You guys tampered.
You're losing me a little with that one, I
think. Probably not going to fly. Probably a court won't allow that. But, we've talked about, I don't want to get into the contracting and the professionalization of football, but good luck fielding a football team with California regulatory and litigiousness. I'll just leave it at that. So good luck, USC. I can't wait for OSHA to visit one of your practices. All right, well, here's another thing. Speaking of practice, we're talking about practice, Ian. We're talking about practice. But before we talk about practice, I want to talk about the game. I want to talk about the game of life and the most important financial decision you'll ever make in your life. Buying a house. This is the guy that you need to call to do it with. It's Gabe Winslow, mortgage man extraordinaire, Esquire. Do you know what Esquire means, Ian?
Isn't it mean you've achieved the rank of knight in a Victorian period?
Also, attorneys use that.
You have to
and Gabe is an attorney. Over 20 years in the industry. He's got a law degree from a top 25 law school, former National Merit Scholar. This guy's way overqualified to be doing mortgages. So please take advantage of him before he realizes that he actually should be running a Wall Street bank or something. Actually, he's really great at what he does. He loves what he does, and he's an independent contractor. That means he's going to shop your deal to 70 different lenders and try to get the best possible deal for you. When you go to Big Bank USA, fill in the blank, they don't care about you, and they're going to shop you to exactly one lender. That is not the way to do a deal, my man. For every buyer, you need a seller. For every seller, you need a buyer. Go get 70 buyers. Trust me, what you sell will be much better. Call Gabe, 832-557-1095. That's 832-557-1095. All right, we were talking about practice, like our man Allen Iverson. I want to talk about spring ball, and specifically spring games. What the heck is going on with our sport, Ian? Is nothing sacred? Can we not have spring games anymore? Talk to me.
Well, there's reporting and rumors going around that spring games may become a thing of the past. Matt Rule is canceling their spring game, I believe, so that other teams cannot watch their games and try to poach their better players, he says. I think the other teams know who your good players are and are not.
They generally do. Every now and then there is a spring game surprise. But also, Nebraska, don't flatter yourself. you don't have a lot of coveted guys. But I also wonder, is there an ulterior motive for that? Or do you think that's actually he's plainly stating what the issue is?
You know, he might be to an extent. Like people will say that spring games are not really meaningful for scouting or things like that, but I find that they kind of are.
You and I watch a lot of spring games of our opponents.
Yeah,
I learned stuff from it.
It's not like they tell the tight ends like pretending they can't block. You know.
Well, I remember distinctly. This will be on brand for you, but you telling me, have you watched the OU spring game yet? And I said, no, I haven't gotten around to it yet. And you just went, watch the O-line. And you kind of like chuckled. And I was like, really? And you're like, yeah, it's going to be bad. So I was like, interesting. And you know what? I watched the OU spring game, and yeah, it wasn't good. And that bore out for the season.
Yeah, you can't fake. It's all fundamentals and vanilla. And the score and the outcomes don't matter, and they're very misleading. But if you find the clip where it's like, hey, here's the second string tight end trying to block this first or second string defensive end, and then you can see if he can actually do it or not, you know? So I do think that there is value to hiding your spring practices from your opponents. I don't know if that's really what Rule is after here, but
it could be about the scout. It could be about the individual personnel scout that he's worried about guys getting poached. And that's legitimate.
yeah.
I will say that we significantly upped the confidence of some of our opponents from our spring game. If you watched our defensive backfield and you didn't know who the players were, because if you guys remember, Ewers and of course Arch just lit up our DBs, and we're all like, "Oh, nothing's been fixed." But then you rewatch the game and you're like, "Oh, those guys aren't that guy's not playing. Oh, we're fine. Like it's good." But who knows? But I do think that's interesting. Here's another thing. At Texas, they're discussing, and I know other schools are discussing this, particularly ones who go deep into the playoffs. Texas played 16 games, man. That used to be an NFL regular season if you didn't make the playoffs. And that's a pretty significant burden on a football team to basically get some recovery time and then whip around. And then in the spring, you go through a bunch of practices, and then you do a bunch of scrimmages, and you have a big game. We're hearing that Texas is discussing the idea of maybe canceling it and going to a more of a professional sort of OTAs model. Do you think that's legitimate? Do you think that's smart? Do you think other people are going to follow? Or do you think having the spring game is still a useful, not only for fans, but also a useful thing for the players to point to where they get to sort of show out of what they're capable of, the next generation?
I think it is useful for them in that regard. And the more I think about it, the more I think the 16-game season is a red herring. Like I've found this new amusing hobby of finding former Belichick players tell stories about being with the Patriots back in the day. Like Edelman and Gronk have a podcast, and you can find other clips too. And they'll tell stories of OTAs and practices that were plenty physical. And probably that was a little bit unique with the Patriots, but you think about like what OTAs are going to look like for Texas. Is it really going to be just like a walk in the park where everybody's like cold plunging in between reps and, going light? I don't think so. So I think there is a if we don't have a spring game where Trey Owens or Malik Murphy show out, they're not going to get a bunch of offers to transfer. If we don't have a spring game where it's clear that Jahdae Barron is a linchpin in our secondary, maybe Oregon won't try to poach him. If we don't make clear our pecking order, even to the players, it feels like it could be a way to exert control and leverage over the program.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I will say there's a difference between 25-year-olds and 19-year-olds in what their bodies can handle and their durability and the degree in which they basically built themselves out to be durable. And specifically, there's a weird tension between the player's physical development, which will actually happen in the weight room and running and doing strength and conditioning, versus their football development, which happens on the football field. Right after a season, the player is at their weakest, their most injured, sort of the most messed up, because they haven't been able to really lift weights. They've done some maintenance stuff through the season, but they've mostly just been playing football. And they've got a bunch of dings and some injuries and stuff like that. So some of them are getting surgeries. Some of them need to just be off their stuff. But by January, February, or late January, or even mid-February in our case, now guys are starting to get back in the weight room. And they're starting to regain their strength and actually start to build up their strength. I wonder to the degree to which when you push all that back further in the year, you're now interfering with their football development in spring practices. And both are vital. And 19-year-olds are not 25-year-olds in terms of how their bodies are built out. So I think that's an interesting tension that people are trying to work their way through. To me, the other thing that you might do, and Texas fans are going to like throw stuff at the screen as I say this, you may have to start the season earlier.
Ooh. Can you tease this out a little bit more? So let me see if I'm understanding properly.
Yeah.
You're saying that because of the extended season, players need more time to recover. They need more time to recover, and also the timeline of recovery is now fits differently in the calendar.
It's different on the calendar because you needed guys to heal up from a bunch of bruises and bumps anyway. You can't condition them hard right after the season. And then when they start to ramp up and they're starting to get stronger in the weight room and they're starting to feel better and they're running better and they can actually improve physically,
that's when you want to practice.
Well, now practice hits you. And during spring practice, you ain't lifting heavy, right? You're not doing your squats and your deadlifts and your bench and a bunch of chin-ups. You might do a little maintenance stuff on some off days, but you're concentrating on your football development at that point. So
you're taking away from your potential to develop your body.
That's it. And so some programs err too much on the side of physical development and they neglect the football part. Some spend too much time on the football part and they neglect the physical development. Texas under Sark seems to have been striking a good balance. Results on the field and the NFL draft seem to suggest that, at least. I'm telling you, pushing the calendar back all the way into late January is having an effect on all of this.
Yeah.
And, Torrey Becton has the entire year charted out. He's never charted out, like we're back and able to work out and lift in late January or February. Before that was happening a whole month earlier. And it doesn't sound like much, but it's actually a big deal in a training cycle. Because in a month, a 19-year-old elite athlete can add all sorts of strength and ability that would shock people, I think. So anyway, I think it's a very interesting tension, and maybe canceling the spring game or altering the structure of those practices could have an effect. Or maybe you have spring practice in April, like late April. I don't know. I don't know how to do it.
In the NFL, their OTAs are like July or June, right?
Yeah, but the classic OTA is like, this is our playbook. Let's do shorts and shoulder pads and like walk through stuff, right?
Yeah, Texas is basically doing that year round, right?
Yeah.
Like in maybe
We exactly honor the 20 hours requirement. Let's be clear.
yeah, right.
But yes,
Like with a tennis ball instead of a football or something. Yeah.
that's right. So I guess my question is, for the fan perspective, it's a bummer.
Terrible.
It's a
Terrible.
bummer. So what could they do to replace a spring game?
Well, do they have any practices with scrimmages? Because I've been to spring game events in Michigan where they like only did practices or they only did drill work and then they left because Harbaugh's crazy. Or they would have like these stupid draft scrimmages that were like totally fake and people would still come. I used to love going to max open practices in the fall, and they would end with like some thud tempo scrimmages. And even to my young, untrained eyes, those were pretty revelatory and fun. Plus,
So should we just have like a dunk competition, a fastest man competition?
I mean, probably for the common fan,
race.
if the common fan would love that. If they just had an open practice with scrimmaging and even like 7-on-7, I would eat that up and I would go.
I would have a bachelor auction. Proceeds go to a children's hospital. And then I would have the offense box the defense. No one would get hurt.
Protect. Yeah. It's really good.
But Arch has to fight a linebacker. And if he wins, come on.
Yeah, come on. No,
we got our guy.
We're in business.
All right. So is the lack of spring games going to piss off TV channels, or is this a negligible concern?
Well, it's not negligible because TV calls the shots in college football. Does it piss them off? I'm not entirely sure.
Well, I'm glad you said that, Ian, because it's a nice segue and these last 3 or 5 minutes of the deep dive before you interject as I try to do the outro.
Yeah.
This is a great segue to an article I just wrote on Inside Texas, a place that you should all join and go read. It was about why Texas was the great realignment prize. And so what this is a list of the top 20 most watched regular season games. Texas, now playing in a real league, Ian, appeared in 5 of the 17 most watched regular season games, including number 1 and number 2, as you can see, and 4 of the top 13. Texas appeared in games that were ranked number 1, number 2, number 10, number 13, and number 17. The only team that was more telegenic and more watched than the Texas Longhorns, Georgia Bulldogs. And when Texas and Georgia played each other twice, guess where those 2 games were ranked? What a shocker. Number 1 and number 2.
And these are strictly regular season / conference championship games.
A conference championship game is actually technically considered regular season.
Yeah.
Playoffs. So if you want to include the playoffs, of course, Texas also showed out extremely well. Very high viewership for Clemson, for Arizona State, and of course for Ohio State. Texas provided the bulk of the television sets for Arizona State and for Clemson. However, when we played Ohio State, that was basically a peer. You're getting comparable TV viewership from them. It's kind of like playing Georgia in that respect. Like as many people are watching Georgia as they are watching you. And this is in a big contrast to our old league, Ian. So that league, the Big 12, has 16 teams in it. They appeared in the top 20 exactly 0 times. Texas appeared 5 times. They appeared in the top 50 6 times, all in the bottom half of the top 50. Texas appeared in the top 50 7 times. If you add in the playoffs, Texas was in the top 50 10 times. The Big 12 was in the top 50 7 times. So Texas, as a media property, is more valuable than the Big 12. This is something I've been writing for 15 years and basically pointing out in rage that we got bribed by the Longhorn Network and the ESPN not to upend the apple cart and cause the realignment cascade. Because at that time, ESPN was not prepared for it. They were prepared for it 2 years ago. And I always was angry about that. And a lot of people were sort of like, oh, I mean, no, I mean, certainly Texas isn't holding up the Big 12 that much. Texas was holding up the Big 12 that much. And in fact, I think the TV networks didn't adequately do the math on the loss of Texas and to a lesser but important extent OU to what that meant to Big 12 interest and TV sets. And I think they'll be very eager to renegotiate in 6 years when that contract comes back up, which is why your Mark is feverishly working to add basketball schools, trying to find some revenue expansion, bringing in venture capitalists. Did I say vulture? Bringing in venture capitalists. It would be a very your Mark move to get a VC stake in the Big 12, get a big personal payout, and then leave right before the new TV contract, right? But anyway, I thought that was interesting. Do you have any thoughts or general? This probably shouldn't surprise you, Ian.
Right.
You probably knew this, but it's interesting to see it.
It is interesting. Like the Big 12 they would have games that were more solid back in the day.
Yes.
Although not on this level, like 7 million was always high for a Big 12.
Well, and that's the thing is not only does Texas have a ceiling, being in the most watched team other than Georgia, we have a great floor. So our games against Arkansas, Florida, and Kentucky all had 4 million plus viewers.
Yeah, that'd be the very top end of the best Big 12 games when Texas was in the conference.
And when the Big 12 had 6 games in the regular season that were in the top 50, 3 of them were Colorado, and 1 of them was the Big 12 title game.
Yeah.
Here's the good news for the Big 12. Deion Sanders is going to stay in Boulder for probably 20 years. And I think Travis Hunter is going to play there, another 7 or 8 years?
Another 7 or 8 eligibility.
Yeah. So I think they're good.
I knew they didn't want to hear this, but their fans, it was inevitable that their interest in their own alma maters declines when they're not playing Texas.
So all these teams, what people don't realize, and I wrote about this in my season football preview. I wrote a long essay about this, about the structures of this, in an essay basically saying goodbye and good luck. They structure all their season ticket packages around Texas.
Yeah.
When they host. And then in the off year, they hope that they get OU. And then they can structure it around OU, but it's not quite the pull. That's just a fact. And so if you were a Texas fan and you wanted to go to the Baylor game, you could wait for the open market. But if you wanted to buy season tickets before, you had to buy 4 other games. You were required to do so. And that's why they would have the one sellout a year playing Texas. And then against Cincinnati, there's 23,000 people in the stands and they lie about attendance. So that's what's going on. And an interesting parting thought, 2 things. The SEC was responsible for 62 of the top 98 matchups. The Big Ten was 22. The reason is the Big Ten is very strong at the top in terms of viewership. No one watches the bottom of the Big Ten at all. Whereas in the SEC, 17 of the 18 SEC schools had at least one top 50 game. The only school that was left out was Vanderbilt because they beat Alabama on the SEC network. So it was one of the most watched SEC network games ever. Had it been on a regular cable channel, ESPN or even ESPN2, it would have made the top 50. So the SEC very strong at the top, but also damn good interest at the middle and in the bottom. People watch their teams.
I've maintained for a while that a big driving force of SEC and college football is the lack of cities and thus pro teams in the South.
Yeah.
for what's also the most football crazed part of the country.
Yep.
But the Big Ten does have a good middle class, though, does it not? I thought that like your
Not
Iowa
the
and your
TV viewership.
Wisconsin.
No. Wisconsin did have their most viewed game when they played Alabama.
Well, okay, but Wisconsin was also pretty wretched this year.
Here's the thing: even when Texas is down, and Texas has been down, we are very durable. We're still going to be in the top 10 of national viewership, even playing in the Big 12. That's just been proven out. Wisconsin doesn't have that level of viewership durability. They just don't. Michigan does. Ohio State, certainly. Oregon, actually, a lot less viewership than people think. Oregon's built on winning. They're not built on TV sets.
They're also new money. Like
they're new money. They don't. Texas draws quite a bit of passive interest of the non-aligned fan. It's a guy in Piscataway, New Jersey, who likes college football, and Rutgers is his number one team. But he's like, oh, Texas is playing Kentucky. That's good football. I like Texas. I'll watch that. Or I hate Texas. I'll watch that.
They also have generations of fans, though, too. Texas does. Whereas
living alumni is very key.
Oregon has been a thing that Oregon football has been a thing that people have been fans of for all of like the 21st century, and that's it.
They have a lot of fans who like tacky day-glow clothing, and that's about it.
Like,
so
maybe it'll be different in 50 years if they're still relevant. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it doesn't take long. I mean, Nebraska football built a demographic appeal on excellence, on winning a lot of games and having a mystique. But you saw how quickly that all fell apart when they started losing. Nebraska football is not a draw. People don't watch it. Now, if they start winning again, all that will return. I think Oregon's the same. If you win enough over time, you begin to develop a national interest. But there are certain programs that are just durable. Texas, Ohio State, Bama, Georgia. People are going to watch those teams come hell or high water, rain or shine. And anyway, that's an interesting thing to end this on. I think it is proof positive that when I was shooting off my mouth about the value of Texas and why it was the great prize of realignment, this confirms it. People were saying, well, no, Texas A&M delivers the state of Texas. Texas A&M is the second great deliverer of the state of Texas. And by the way, Texas fans should not diminish them, particularly if they ever really can win. They'll get a bunch of eyeballs. But the people arguing that SMU and TCU even deliver Texas or a regional market of Texas, let me leave you with this parting thought. And I heard a bunch of idiots opine this in the national media that the ACC was smart to bring in SMU because that captures DFW, which is the top 5 media market. Well, TCU and SMU played each other, Ian, for the great Iron Skillet. And they drew 322,000 viewers. Not in DFW, in the United States of America. 322,000. They don't deliver DFW. They don't deliver Frisco. They don't deliver Fort Worth. And they don't deliver University Park or Highland Park. The reality is Texas delivers the state of Texas. The number 2 is A&M. And number 3 is so far down the list, it just doesn't matter.
It's like Alabama or something, or LSU.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually the best SEC game that's on.
Oklahoma, maybe.
It's Tennessee Auburn, right?
Yeah.
It's like whatever and actually Oklahoma, I would argue, is probably the number 3 team in DFW. Yeah. But that's the point, and that's what people don't understand. So when people are saying TCU delivers Texas or Houston delivers the city of Houston or SMU is going to really provide the ACC, the Dallas market, it's all nonsense. It's all people who don't know anything, which not uncharacteristic of the national media. So on that note, Ian, any final parting thoughts?
Yeah, I have some notes on that. Why the Mavericks trading Luka was actually the right idea. No, I mean it's like a test case of what you're saying. Like people, you're one of you is going to say this, and then the other one says that. You're not allowed to agree. So someone's arguing that Houston matters for the demographic. And the Mavericks actually were totally right to get rid of that fat slob.
Yeah, the fat slob who showed up at his press conference and looked pretty fit. Guess he carries 275 well, Ian.
Even if he's not fit, who cares?
I agree. I don't care if he smokes a cigarette at halftime. Johnny Unitas did it, and look at him. All right, guys. For Ian Boyd, I'm Paul Wadlington saying thanks for taking this deep dive.